Hello, everybody. Dr. Jen Fram. A couple of my clients have been asking for a little bit of support in how they can help team leaders and managers in their organizations deal with the change that's going on at the moment, and in recognizing that the change that's going on at the moment is both forced change and unanticipated change. For example, how do we move our whole organisation to work from home? But also, how do we keep the wheels on our current change projects, which we actually can't stop at the moment? And a lot of our people, for very valid reasons, ourselves for very valid reasons, are feeling stressed, anxious, concerned, and not particularly calm. So what I've prepared is a relatively short presentation which will help you in this. I want to make clear that when I'm talking about leadership, I'm using a very broad context for leadership. So I'm hoping this is helpful to people who are leading themselves, leading families, leading communities, leading their organisations, leading teams. So please don't be constrained to, if you're not in a formal leadership role, this is not going to be useful for you. So while I look at sharing my screens, can I get, by starting you, to take a deep breath and breathe in for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4. Release slowly 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's called a box breath and box breathing, and you'll find that that is very, very helpful in resetting a comfortable breathing pattern for you, because of course in times that are really stressful we do tend to become shallow breathers, and shallow breathing induces a somewhat panicked state for us. So hold on to that little tip. Give yourself the blessing of doing it a couple of times today, tomorrow, the weeks to come. As I said, what I'm really interested in is this notion of how do we create calm to lead in volatile times. Volatile is the key word for me. Many of you will be familiar with the term VUCA. So VUCA being an acronym for a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We often use this term when we're thinking about different forms of leading, new ways of working, new ways of leading to address a VUCA world. I suspect this is actually the first time we've really, really been tested with a world that is both volatile and ambiguous. I think that we are pretty well recognising we've been working with a lot of uncertainty and complexity, but I think in terms of an accelerated range of change in unexpected or unstable circumstances and no precedents for what's happening, it's absolutely the world that we're living in at the moment. And of course, many of our leaders are telling us, beseeching us, frustratedly admonishing us to just keep calm. Anybody who has been on the receiving end of the instruction, just keep calm, will be acutely aware that it certainly doesn't calm you. And to understand why, I thought it'd be helpful just take you through what's happening in our brains when we perceive threat. So this representation here is pretty crass, right? Our brain is obviously a lot more complex than this, but this is perhaps more useful for us to think about in terms of how do we lead during volatile times. So our brain we can consider as having 3 functional areas. Our front brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the part of our brain that is responsible for logical and rational thinking. It's where all our high performance stuff goes on. Our back brain, which is otherwise known as the reptilian brain, is responsible for keeping us alive in steady state times, when times are cruising along. So it is very primitive. It's hunger, it's sex drive, it's thirst, it's all those kind of things. It's also short-term memory, which is interesting when you are in a panicked state. The area that is perhaps most useful for us to think about at the moment is the limbic system, which is that part in the middle of our brain, the hypothalamus, the amygdala, that is responsible for how we feel, our emotional response during change. And it is incredibly useful to us in keeping us alive when under threat. So if you've ever had that sensation of something doesn't feel quite right and the hairs are raising on your arms, that's probably because your limbic system has detected a threat and is trying to work out, will you go into a state of fight, flight, or freezing? Now, what happens for us during change is that the brain, being as efficient as it is, it channels all of the energy from your front brain and your primitive brain into the limbic system to keep you alive. Now, in doing that, it has the effect, or the broad effect, of over-engaging your amygdala. So Daniel Goleman talks about it as an amygdala hijack. We're all about fight, flight, and freeze. And it actually diminishes the pathways to your prefrontal cortex, which is where you do your rational thinking. So if you're looking around you at the moment and going, some of the behaviors I'm seeing at the moment are just not rational, they just don't make sense. If people could just think, well, they can't just think at the moment. They're in an amygdala hijack. They are perceiving threat and their brains are doing a very efficient job of trying to keep them alive. This is represented in the SCARF model, which has come from David Rock's work in the Neuro Leadership Institute. And it is an exceptionally useful model to think about, because it's quite simple, it's quite elegant, to think about what's happening for people. Through the work that they've done on neuroscience studies, they've determined that there are 5 elements that are most likely to inflame our limbic system under threat. And those elements are status. So will people still feel good about themselves? Certainty, autonomy, relatability, and fairness. And if we look at each of those at the moment and say, well, what does this mean in context of COVID-19 and in context of an impending, economic downturn and significant downturn? Status is really, status applies not just about, has my title changed in the job, but it's, am I learning something for the first time and I feel like I'm a newbie, or I feel that once upon a time I knew what I was doing and now I'm having to learn all this new stuff. Brené Brown has got a brand new podcast out, and her very first episode, she talks about the acronym she uses is FFT, which I won't go into. You can listen to the podcast. However, what it's about is how crummy do we feel when we are doing things for the first time. And so many of us have had to start using new platforms, new technologies, working from home, negotiating. How do we do this? So our status, because we don't know how to do this, has really taken a knock. Certainty is the obvious one. We have very little certainty at the moment. We cannot get information on timeframes, timelines. It's really quite challenging. Autonomy. So when we have perceived control over what we're doing, we feel more comfortable with change. When we perceive we don't have control of that, that's when we'll be moving into a threat response. So we do recognise that at the moment, with what's happening, we have very little control over what's happening. Equally, a whole stack of people are now working from home and have complete control over their world. And for many, that lack of structure can be equally stressful. Relatability, that gets back to, are you one of my tribe? Are you going to eat me? If you feel that you don't relate to people at the moment, you'll be recognizing that as a threat. And then finally, fairness. So whenever a change comes through, if it's perceived to be unfair, it will create that amygdala hijack. So people will be really inflamed with it and not perceive it's fair. So the trick for us in change is to look at these 5 elements and go, how can we reduce the threat? How can we improve the reward on each of these 5 elements? So part of the challenge for us is, how do we create calm in recognizing that people do feel quite inflamed, that their limbic systems are rightly directing the energy to how do we survive at the moment, and how do we create an optimum state for people to get back into thinking a little bit more rationally, being able to exist in a more comfortable way. The first tip I would offer you is to ground yourself. This is absolutely critical, and the techniques of grounding can range from, making sure that you've got bare feet on the earth, the box breathing that we did at the beginning of this presentation, guided meditation. It doesn't matter what your technique is, and there are hundreds out there. It matters that you do it. It's exactly the same as the analogy we use on the air flight emergency briefings, which is give yourself oxygen before you give it to the child next to you. You cannot hope to calm your team if you are not calming yourself first. Second is address the chemistry of the stress. So when that limbic system inflames, what it does is it produces a lot of cortisol and adrenaline. Now, these hormones are really helpful to us in escaping, right? So they're really, really useful in detecting threat. And when we're in a crisis, we want cortisol and we want adrenaline. The problem is that when we have a surplus of it, when we're producing cortisol and adrenaline constantly or in a sustained state, that's when we're seeing really bad impacts on our immune system, our cardiac system. There's a whole world of pain we're in when we are constantly creating stress hormones. So part of our challenge then as leaders is what can we do to generate the happy hormones, so dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that act as a buffer under stress. So the more of these happy hormones you've got, the better placed you are to deal with threat and to think things through, because they prevent you or they shield you from going into that fight, flight, or freeze response. Two of the most simplest ways of doing that: laughter, so creating opportunities for laughter, and expressing gratitude. Gratitude is really lovely. It has a two-way function. So when you express gratitude, you have happy hormones happen for you, but the person that's receiving the gratitude also gets those happy hormones happening. So I can't underscore how important it is at the moment to be looking at how do we really bolster dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin in our workforce, our family, our community. The third topic or tip is to lead with an open heart and an open mind. This is really challenging for us, I think, because we don't tend to talk about love in the workplace. And this is what I am talking about. When you are leading with an open heart, you are leading with love. It is distinct. When we talk about compassion, it is distinct from empathy. If your empathy is good, right, we want empathy in small moments, but if you are staying in empathy for prolonged time, what you are doing is generating more of the stress hormones because you're sharing somebody else's pain. If you can flip that to think about how can I sit in a space of compassion with this person so that I'm sharing love with this person, you're generating your happy hormones. You can sit in compassion for an infinite period of time. You will have empathy fatigue if you choose to use empathy. Open minds are about listening attentively. So being really focused on the people that you're with, the conversations that you're in. This benefits the other person in that, again, it raises the happy hormones for them, but it also has the additional benefit of perhaps you're going to get different ideas than you would have got before because people realize for the first time they're being listened to. Of course, the importance of reinforcing stability is critical. There will be stability out there at the moment. There will be things that you can do to maintain your rituals. If you've always risen at 6 o'clock to go to the gym, you can't go to the gym at the moment, but you can rise at 6 and you can still do some form of exercise. Think about what regular meetings you have in your teams. How can you turn them into a virtual environment so it provides stability for them? Equally, any of our messaging at the moment, repeat what is staying the same. There will be ample concepts, ideas, things that are happening in your world that are staying the same. The trick is you're going to have to repeat them several times for people to receive that information, because their beautifully attentive brain is looking at threat and looking for more threat. So you're going to have to repeat this several times for it to come through. And then look after your body, right? You only have one body. This is critical. And I think, you know, part of this is being really attentive to breath, inviting others to breathe with you, just as I did at the beginning of this presentation. Making sure that you are hydrated. When our brain is functioning really well, it is the thirstiest organ in the whole body. So again, start all of your virtual meetings at the moment with a little reminder. Has everybody got a glass or a bottle of water at hand? Making sure that people are sipping with them. So they're really simple tips, but they're the ones that I know that are the most effective at helping create a sense of calm so that you can do further change or just create an easier way to be for the people on your team. So my partner in the Agile Change Leadership Institute, Lena Ross, loves to share this quote. It's her favourite, from Nance Guy-Martin of The Power of Pause. I'm not here to make you comfortable with change. I'm here to help you be comfortable with discomfort. Never has there been a truer saying out there. I think it's absolutely perfect for the time that we are in. Our ability to not just survive, but thrive at the moment is our ability to be comfortable with discomfort. If I can provide you with any more assistance in that, there's a couple of ways. I've moved my podcast to a weekly cadence at the moment so that we can keep talking about keeping calm, leading change during volatile times. So look for that wherever you look at your podcasts, Conversations of Change with Dr. Jen. I also have a self-assessment sheet for people to determine to what extent are they an exploratory leader. This is a relatively new concept that I've been working on. And again, I think the timing is pretty perfect because we are all exploring new frontiers at the moment. For those of you who want some more formal professional development at the moment, we do have the Agile Change Leadership Certificate. Everything in this has been updated to be able to be done by remote workers. So drop us a line if that's of interest for you. Regardless, I hope that you can be brave, that you can be curious, that you can be creative, and that you can create calm in these really, really challenging times. Do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not connected already. I wish you the very best in the time to come.